So this is the tried and true classic B17 leather saddle by Brooks. And this is the little bit more expensive, little bit more mysterious Berthoud saddle. Is there one leather saddle to truly rule them all? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers. And if you're new to the channel, if you're into riding party pace, you have found your people, hit that subscribe button. So a lot of you are probably no stranger to the Brooks B17. It is a favorite of hipsters and bike tourists alike. I personally have ridden them on and off over the last 20 years that I've been riding a bike. And I know, like many Brooks owners out there, you've stared longingly and with some curious interest as to the Berthoud saddles. Are they that much better? Do they justify the price? What is the functional difference, if any? Before I start this video, I do have to say saddle review videos are a pain in the butt, literally and figuratively. Everyone's butt is different. Some saddles that may be comfortable for me may not work for you, yada, 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 all these caveats. But I'm going to try my best to talk about these saddles objectively so you guys can make the right choice. So speaking of caveats, let's get into the first one. This one came with my Rivendell when I purchased it, and this one was sent in by Berthoud to review. You'll notice there's also a big difference. This one's got the slotted hole in the middle. This one does not. I'd actually requested a solid one so I could do more apples to apples comparison, but this is what we got, folks. Will this hole make a difference? To some extent, but I think there are some pretty defined differences regardless of the hole or not. Let's start off with the objective, empirical, measurable things. And the first one being weight, because we're cyclists and some people care about these things. The Berthoud Aspin Open with the hole weighs in at 480 grams. You can get this lighter. There is a titanium rail model, but this is just the stainless steel one. The Brooks Classic B17. This one weighs in at 520 grams. So the Brooks is 40 grams heavier. Not that's a huge difference, but it's a difference. Looking at the rails, I measured this distance right where the rail kind of kinks to where it kinks over here. And on the Brooks with my ruler, it came into 70 millimeters. Looking at the rails on the Aspin, this was slightly longer at 75 millimeters on my ruler. So if you have problems with getting the saddle far back enough with your Brooks, then the Berthoud might be a viable option. Let's talk about the leather, because you can't talk about leather saddles without talking about leather, obviously. I measured both the saddles at the edge here with some digital calipers, and the Brooks came out to 4.3 millimeters. So 4.3 millimeters right there. With the same digital calipers measured at about the same part of the saddle, the Berthoud measured in at 5.6 millimeters. So the leather on the Berthoud is indeed thicker. If that's a sign of comfort or quality, that's, I think, up to debate. But empirically speaking, objectively speaking, thicker leather on the Berthoud. Both of them have bag loops. This is where one would attach the straps of a Care style bag or other bag of that nature. On the Brooks, they are set a little bit further apart at 85 millimeters. I think the holes are also bigger and marginally easier to get a strap into. On the Berthoud, the spacing between the two loops is 75 millimeters. I don't know if you can see, but the hole is also inset at kind of an angle. So the slide is a bit more difficult to work a strap through, but I did test it with different bags, and both saddles worked with bags that used either a leather strap or a volet strap. So that's not something to worry about, people. Now, in terms of the shape of the saddle, if you look at both saddles from the top view, the Brooks is clearly wider. It just has more material here. With the Berthoud, it is a little bit on the narrower side. Let's put them side by side. Hopefully this can show you guys something. So in terms of the width of the saddle, the Brooks B17 is on the wider side. It's wider not only just in this rear part, but also through the nose, and the width is also accentuated because of the skirt here of the saddle. This tends to kind of flare out. So if you're one where you're sensitive to kind of chafing in the inner thigh, it's more likely to happen in the Brooks. As opposed to the Berthoud, it's very sleek and slender, and the sides are a lot more flat, and they have less of a tendency to flare out. I don't know if I can illustrate that, but yeah, You can see the less flaring. Another big difference is the rivets. You can see here on the Brooks that the rivets are pretty much non-serviceable. You can't unscrew these, and the rear ones are on top of the saddle. Whereas with the Berthoud, you can see that they've got tiny little star bolts here, technical term, Torx bolt of some kind. And you can see their positioning, they are on the rear of the saddle. In my experience, this gives you a lot more saddle to play with, to slide over the back without feeling the rivets on the Brook. One upside of the rivets on the Berthoud is because they are bolts, you can actually service the saddle. You can change the top to a different color leather or a closed as opposed to an open saddle design. Definitely more user serviceable than the Brooks. These are rivets, and there's no way to really pop these out without potentially destroying the saddle. Certainly not as easy as unscrewing a bolt. Another interesting design difference is that this is all metal from the rails to this frame here. Whereas on the Berthoud, the rails are steel, but this is a hard composite plastic, which I also believe can be replaced if you happen to break that. I think one interesting difference, I don't know if I can illustrate it with this shot here, but it's a general contour of the saddle. I find that on the Brooks, there is a depression here, then a little bit of a hill, and then back down to a depression. These depressions capture your sit bone. This is where you sit and the saddle conforms to your butt. Similar to some extent on the Berthoud, but I find that it's just, generally speaking, a little bit more concave. The depression less pronounced. This is a relatively newish saddle to me, so I've only been riding it for a couple months. I do expect a depression to form, but out of the box, more concave and a bit stiffer leather. So I think that's about as far as I can go with the objective measurable stuff. So I'm going to start talking about things which are my opinions. So let's talk about comfort a little bit. A lot of you want to know which one is more comfortable. And I think comfort comes in a couple different ways. One, in how pliable the leather is, but also the shape of the saddle. Does it work for your sit bone? Between the two, out of the box, the Brooks is definitely softer, a little bit more supple, gives a little bit more to pressure. I personally think that the horror stories of Brooks being really hard don't apply to the B17. For me, they tend to be generally pretty pliable, and I don't have to break a B17 in. The Berthoud, on the other hand, because it is a thicker leather, I find the leather here definitely on the stiffer side when compared to a Brooks B17. This isn't necessarily a bad thing because I'm kind of used to riding on slightly harder saddles. So to me, even though the leather is tough, it was pretty comfortable. So if you define comfort by how much give a saddle gives, I think the Brooks certainly gives more. Let's talk about the other aspect of comfort, and that is the shape. Which shape does your butt get along with better? So like I tried to describe before, the Brooks here, it's got a depression and then a little bit of a hill and then a little bit of a concave depression. And for me, my butt actually doesn't get along with the Brooks nearly as well as with the Berthoud. And that's primarily because with these two depressions, you've got a little bit of a hill here. I want to say like a taint bridge, which I tend not to get along with. The Berthoud, on the other hand, although it does have a slight curve, it feels like a flatter saddle to me without a pronounced ridge in the middle. Yes, I understand that this is the open version. I did, however, try a closed version of this saddle on the Mahal, and I found a similar experience. Generally, the shape was flatter, a little bit more predictable. So if you like a flatter top saddle, then you might get on with the Berthoud a little bit more. Another thing I've experienced is that with the Brooks B17 specifically, again, this changes with the Swallow or the Team Pro. Seems to work better when I'm riding a bike in a more upright position. So the handlebars are, certainly at least level with the saddle, if not a little bit higher. This prevents me from leaning forward over the taint bridge here. The more aggressive a bike is set up, the less I like the B17. The Aspin, on the other hand, I feel like works better with, for me, on bikes where the handlebars are level, if not a little bit lower. There's a little bit less saddle here to interfere. it feels more comfortable in a slightly more aggressive position. Again, not racer aggressive, but handlebars level or a little bit lower. I do think there is a bit of artistry in setting up the saddle. I know when the Riv came, it was pointed slightly upwards. That seems to be the preferred method of setting up a Brooks B17. With the Berthoud, I find that I can set it up level, maybe 1 or 2 degrees upwards, but not nearly as upward facing as a Brooks. So let's get to the question that a lot of you have had on your minds, and that is the Berthoud worth it? Again, this is a question that is almost impossible to answer because value is completely subjective. For some, the Brooks is already too expensive, so the Berthoud isn't even an option. And ultimately, a more expensive saddle doesn't mean it's more comfortable. The materials and production and quantities may determine that price, but there is no rule saying the more you spend, the more comfortable the saddle will be. So I can't answer value that way. But I will say this, for me, I do struggle to be comfortable on a B17, whereas the flatter shape of the Berthoud just gets along with my butt a little bit better. So if I were speccing out a bike and I had to choose between these two, would it be worth it to me for a more comfortable saddle, even though this does cost a pretty penny? The answer would be yes. Other things which I think add to the value of the Berthoud is the user serviceability. I think that's pretty cool. Let's say you don't like the color or you want to switch from open to close. You can do that. It's still going to cost you some money, but you don't have to reinvest the total amount. You can just get the leather part. Also, if something breaks, a rail or the composite, you definitely pay a little bit more upfront, but included in that price is the ability to service the saddle. Whether that's worth it for you, that is completely your decision. I've fallen in and out of love with Brooks B17s over the years. Was a big fan of them early on, bike commuting and bike touring, but as I've aged, the shape has kind of not worked so well for me. And I thought I was done with leather saddles forever. However, test riding the Gio Berthoud on the Mahal made me really curious, and having a longer term test with this on the Rivendell, if I was going to buy another leather saddle, I'd probably lean towards the Gio Berthoud. Yes, it is definitely expensive, but damn, they look good, and it's also pretty comfortable for me. Again, saddle reviews, pain in the butt to do. I'm going to close and say that this is by far a less than optimal apples to apples review. Cutout notwithstanding, I actually think the B17 and the Aspin are completely different saddle shapes. This might be closer to something like the Swallow or the Team Pro rather than the B17, but the B17 is what I had. Aspin Open was the saddle that was sent to review, so just try my best. That's what I think. What do you guys think? Are you guys Team Brooks or Team Berthoud? Have I convinced you either way, or are you vegan and you're just like, that's gross, I'm gonna unsubscribe? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this content, don't forget to visit the gift shop and buy a sticker, a pin, or a brand new print. It's how I keep the lights on, how the videos keep coming, all through your support. And as always, everyone, keep the supple side down.